okay, you might be technically...
Steve Bannon, the controversial former Trump campaign manager and advisor, is touring Europe. After Italy, France and Switzerland, this week he stopped in Hungary to give a speech entitled Trump's America First and its Impact on Central Europe. Euronews sat down with Bannon for an interview about the main political issues affecting Europe at the moment and to understand what he hopes to achieve in the future.
You've spoken about a brave new world. Can you paint me a picture of where Europe, the European Union, will be in 10, 20 years from now?
Well, I think one thing, it'll be a collection of nations. You know, one thing about the European
Union.
No. I think the European Union will still be around. I think what it was going down a path of being like the United States, where these nation states kind of gave up their total nationhood and were part of some bigger organization. I think what you're seeing today, when I say brave new world, I think you're going to have, number one, with populism, I think you're going to have people with much more control of their sovereignty in their citizenship, okay? And I think in nationalism, what you're going to have is a collection of robust nations, right? You're going to have a robust Hungary and Czech Republic and Germany and France. And so I think it's terrific. I think people are going to be down on, actually have more direct control of their countries.
Particularly on things like the conversion.
During the interview, Bannon spoke at length about his admiration for Donald Trump and Viktor Orban, while often attacking the media and what he calls the global elite. The former Trump advisor also praised the newly formed government of Italy, saying that the alliance between the anti-establishment Five-Star Movement and the far-right League was an example of how populism can shape the future of politics.
Here's the thing, and I want to do this off in another separate entity, because I'm inundated with the Berlusconi, sent his guys over his TV station to interview me because he's thinking of running as a populist, right? He's now a populist. He's going to be he wants to run, no. But Orban's guys are all over me, the freedom. If you're interested, what I'd like to do is set up something, and I'll fund it somehow, that I think you're the perfect guy, and it doesn't have to be full-time, but you're my intermediary, you and I together, we help knit together this populist nationalist movement throughout the world. So we've got guys in Egypt are coming to me, the Modi's guys in India, Duterte, and we get Orban and we're somehow some sort of convening authority for conferences and stuff like that, so we can get ideas out there. I mean, do you think that's a worthwhile thing?
Yeah,
or you think
I know.
nobody's got it? Nobody's doing it right now.
It's not being done. I've done a lot of this already in Europe, haven't I? I've done it in Europe, in different groups.
Well, because you're a European parliament, like that.
So I'm used to putting together groups where there are.
As we saw earlier, President Trump's top advisors presented a picture of unity at the annual Conservative Political Action Conference, or CPAC, in Maryland today. Mr. Trump's chief strategist, Steve Bannon, and his chief of staff, Reince Priebus, dismissed the notion of any clashing ideologies within the president's inner circle. To discuss, we are joined by former NPR CEO Ken Stern. He wrote a profile of Steve Bannon for Vanity Fair. And Phil Rucker. He's White House bureau chief for the Washington Post. And we welcome both of you to the NewsHour. I'm going to start with you, Ken Stern. Since you've written about him, fill out the picture for us of who Steve Bannon is, and especially what does he believe?
So Steve, just a little bit of background about Steve Bannon. He was a Goldman Sachs banker, got wealthy doing media deals, got into conservative media doing documentaries, and met Andrew Breitbart and became sort of a friend and counsel to him. And then when Andrew died, he took over Breitbart. And he transformed Breitbart. When Andrew Breitbart ran it, it was a site that made a lot of noise, attacked a lot of people in what Andrew Breitbart called the complex, the Democratic Hollywood axis. Right. And then, Steve Bannon turned it into really a political movement, a populist, nationalist political movement that I think Donald Trump eventually rode to power.
And Phil Rucker is somebody who's covering the White House now. How much of that nationalist, populist movement has Steve Bannon brought to the White House?
All of it. You can point to many of the acts that President Trump has taken in his first month in office, and it's that agenda, it's that ideology. And it's not so much that Bannon is a puppeteer here. I think it's more that Bannon and Trump are soulmates ideologically. They both have the same views, the same beliefs about this sort of populism and nationalism and upending the kind of world institutions and structures that we've become accustomed to in the post-World War II era. And you see it on domestic policy, on trade, on economic moves, and also certainly in the foreign policy world.
Ken Stearns, so spell it out for us. I mean, today we heard Steve Bannon use the term economic nationalism. He talked at one point about the deconstruction of the administrative state. What is he saying he wants to do?
I think he wants to change the neoliberal world order, away from free trade, away from open borders. It's America first. It is a philosophy built on the notion that virtue lies with the people, and the establishment has stabbed the people in the back, and he wants to change that world.
You're saying yes, Phil Rucker.
That's exactly right. And it's interesting the language that Bannon used. These are not terms that we often hear in the political mainstream. And in fact, some of these words like globalist, corporatist, are terms you hear on the political left, like the Bernie Sanders campaign. But this is a really different kind of movement here. It's not traditional republicanism. It's nationalism. It's populism. It's changing the structures and the way things work politically and economically in the world and here at home.
Phil Rucker, staying with you, they did, as we were reporting earlier, try to paint a portrait of unity today.
That's right.
You would think that Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon were the dearest friends from way back. What has it really been like inside the White House with them?
Well, it's changed a little bit. I think early on in the White House, there were these competing power structures that President Trump set up on purpose. Bannon is chief strategist, Reince Priebus is chief of staff, and we were getting reports of some tension, not only between them, but among their allies within the administration. But that seems to have cooled off a bit. There was a point a couple weeks in where President Trump told all of his aides in the Oval Office, look, Reince Priebus is in charge. He is the chief of staff. The process runs through him, and I think Bannon has adapted to that, and Bannon is more of the ideas guy, the strategist, the person kind of coming up with the grand plan, whereas Reince Priebus is the one implementing it and orchestrating the process and dealing with kind of the hour-to-hour, day-by-day activities of the White House.
Ken Stearns, so based on what you know about Steve Bannon, how do you see him operating in this White House? Because we heard Phil Rucker say he and the president see eye to eye on a lot. So how does he make his influence felt?
Well, I tend to think, so I agree with Phil. I tend to think of Bannon as sort of the chief ideologist of the Trump White House, the ideas guy, the guy who's the political philosopher. You even heard it today, the way they talked. Bannon talked about deconstructing the administrative state. Priebus talked about 2-for-1 exchanges of regulations. I mean, Bannon's the big idea guy. Priebus is the tactician.
But does that mean that Reince Priebus is going to be prepared to go along with all this agenda that Steve Bannon espouses?
I think this is a very strange bedfellows. You know what they say about politics. But if you went back to Breitbart and during the early part of the election before Bannon joined the campaign, public enemy number one for Breitbart is the Republican establishment. They supported Paul Nehlen against Speaker Ryan. They don't like the things that Reince Priebus stands for. So it's a very odd collection, and they seem genuinely to get along. They may be just good actors, but there's got to be long-term tension between the establishment and the anti-establishment.
What is your sense of that, Phil Rucker? You're saying that they seem to be working together better in the last few weeks. But is there a fear, is there a concern about Bannon having too much influence over the president? How does the rest of the White House staff read him?
There's some concern about that, but people have to remember it's not just Bannon. I mean, Bannon is espousing Trump's views. So if you're going to go to war with Bannon, you're going to war with the president too. And I think the more traditional Republicans in the White House, even if they've been schooled to think differently about these issues ideologically, and even if they personally might feel something different, this is Trump's belief. It's his agenda. It's his worldview. It's the things that he is trying to implement as president. And Bannon is guiding him and leading him in that direction. But the other staffers have to kind of go along or get lost, if you will.
And that sounds like the makings of a tense situation, Ken Stearns.
It does.
It sure does.
I think it really does.
Well, it's certainly something that has all of our attention right now. Ken Stern, Phil Rucker, we thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.